What's up, everybody? We're live. Status Coup fam. What it do? Status Coup. What it do? I appreciate y'all for having me on. I appreciate Status Coup and Jordan and Jen for allowing me to do this while they're gone. So if you don't know, I'm Justin Jackson. I host a YouTube show called The Takeover. And I've kind of been doing this for 2-3 months. So I'm kind of fairly new to it, but I've been in the political lefty space for probably about a year and a half now. At least as far as being vocal in that sense. But I've been pretty much into lefty politics since the 2016 election. So I've been around the block, not as much as people like Jordan and Jen, but I'm getting my feet wet a little bit. But yeah, we have a great show for y'all today. I'm really excited about it. We're going to be talking about obviously what's going on with Israel and Palestine right now. The just absolute barrage of rocket fire that's hitting Gaza. The forced people are don't say forced evictions, and I agree with that because that would imply some type of legal authority for them to be doing that. There's no legal authority for them to be forcefully taking people out of their homes. When they've been there for generations and throwing them out forcefully on the street, there's no justification for that. It's not an eviction. It's not a legal process. So, it is an ethnic cleansing of that neighborhood. Essentially, if you're a Palestinian in that neighborhood, you will be removed. This is I think it's Sheikh, Jarrah, is that how you say it? You will be removed if you're a Palestinian. That's not just eviction. That's ethnic cleansing. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about what's going on with the GOP, with the grand old party, and how they're ousting Liz Cheney. And we're gonna look at some reactions from that, see if those reactions are warranted or if people are just doing that thing where if you hate Trump, then we'll be on your side, which we all know that's really what the case is. And then we're actually going to be showing this ICC report that talks about policing right here in this country. So it'll be a really good show. And then we're actually going to end it with something a little bit different, something I don't think Status Coup covers a lot. Personally, I don't cover it a lot either, but I want to get a little more into it because I think it affects the daily lives of people that are struggling, trying to afford rent, trying to afford, energy bills, trying to afford food and all that type of stuff. And we're gonna talk a little bit about what's going on in the country on that front. So I'm excited. How's everybody doing? I see some of the people that are in my chat a lot. I see also in this chat, so I appreciate you tuning in to this chat with me here on the Status Coup channel. I see you. Let's see, Thomas Horder. I know I've seen you in my chat. Beauty in the diabetes. What's up? How you doing? La 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 cha cha. How you doing? It's great to see you guys. It's great to see y'all in the chat. I like interacting with the chat a lot. I want to make this, more of almost like a conversation. Obviously, I'm just sitting here talking to myself, but I see you guys in the chat, and I want to make sure I'm interacting with you guys. So yeah, stay active in the chat. I definitely read that. So, yeah, we'll start. We'll let a few more people filter in here in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll start it off. We'll start it off. It's been. I feel like there hasn't been as much talk in the kind of like political space. I don't know if that's because there's no bills that are actually getting pushed through right now, or if they're waiting on the next reconciliation bill. Obviously, Joe Manchin and the right wingers in the Democratic Party don't seem to want to get rid of the filibuster, even though once they lose the majority, or if the Republicans get any type of Senate majority, they will immediately get rid of the filibuster. If that means getting tax cuts, getting I don't know, whatever they want for their rich corporate donors, they'll do that in a heartbeat. They don't care about traditions or anything like that. But the Democrats are the Joe Manchin types are acting like it will be the end of the world if that happened, as if there's not already an incredible amount of gridlock in Washington, except for the things that both parties agree on, which is stuff like Israel-Palestine. Come to see it, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that pretty soon here. Thomas, appreciate the super chat. We love you, Justin. Keep up the good fight. All the good status quo vibes we can send you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I'm trying to keep those good vibes up here, even though we're going to be talking about some, absolutely abhorrent stuff. We can all come together and try and fight for that positive change. That's what we're going to try and do with this stream. Wow, crossover between status quo and the takeover. Yeah, so this is the takeover of status quo, but it's just for a day. It's just for a day. Jen and Jordan will be back on the stream pretty soon, but you guys can check me out over at my channel. I almost said the status quo, the takeover. Y'all can check me out at the takeover. Yeah, everyone go ahead, like, comment, interact. It helps get the stream numbers up, and we can get a little boost in the algorithm, because YouTube is constantly coming after channels just like this one, just like Status Quo, who does on the ground reporting, does such good reporting that the mainstream news channels will jack their footage to push on their shows, right? But places like Status Quo here on YouTube will still get demonetized, will still get censored, will still get their videos removed and all the like. So make sure y'all doing everything you can. We're supporting independent left media. Make sure you're subscribing, hitting the notification bell. Make sure you're liking the videos so we can go up in the algorithm. Even though they're going to do everything they can to keep lefty and independent news media, the news that the working class and people actually need to hear, so we can come together and have some type of coalition pushing this country forward, as opposed to the deep dive that our country is doing, because we're owned and operated pretty much by corporations and their subsidiaries, which are the politicians. So we need to do everything we can to get this word out. Because contrary to popular belief, America is not immune to the history of empires. We're not immune to that. And I think we're seeing a lot of, the cracks in the empire are becoming more like gaping wide holes nowadays. So we need to get people on board. We need to do it quickly. To actually get any sort of change. Like, if you can imagine the next 5 to 10 years, right? Someone like Joe Biden in the White House for the next 2 or 3 at least. So that's a conservative in the White House making conservative decisions. So that's not going to push the country forward. And then if you have, whether he decides to run for re-election or not, you're going to have someone probably like Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg being pushed by the Democratic Party to the forefront. So that's another conservative. Or you're going to get someone like Tom Cotton, who's like a far right-wing nut job. So it's pretty urgent, the situation we're in right now. It's pretty urgent. It is pretty urgent. So we got a good amount more people in here, so we can go ahead and get started. Let me set this up real quick for you guys. Make sure everything's all good and ready to go. Okay, let's make sure we're good on that front. Okay. So, if y'all haven't been following what's been going on within Israel and within the Gaza Strip, within the West Bank, and personally, I've learned a lot over the past few days as well. I've learned a lot. So I'm kind of break it down in case y'all haven't been following. So essentially, there's a neighborhood within the West Bank called Sheikh Jarrah, and essentially during during Ramadan and at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, I believe it was, there was Palestinians worshiping there, and then essentially Israeli police came in and broke up this prayer session and started firing the non-lethal, they'll say, type of barrage of attack into the mosque, which dispersed the people there and essentially interrupted their prayer session, or their religious holy session. And a lot of this was sparked by the forced removal, the ethnic cleansing of the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, where Palestinian people who have been living there for generations, as part of the expansion of these illegal settlements, these that have been condemned by international human rights groups. that has been condemned, but Israel has said, because they have the backing of the United States, the world global empire, they said they're going to just continue to do that. They're going to continue to violate international law and forcefully remove, ethnically cleanse some of these neighborhoods, as they try and essentially move towards completely retaking Jerusalem. So that's kind of what was the spark for what's been going on, right? This barrage of rocket fire that's going into the Gaza Strip, and into the West Bank right now. So that's essentially like a breakdown of what kind of started this conflict. And people say you don't really want to call it a conflict because, well, okay, let's say this. The main issue with Israel and Palestine is there's an asymmetry of power. Israel has the backing of the United States, the world empire, right? Global empire. We send billions and billions and billions of dollars to Israel every single year. We send them weapons. We send them state-of-the-art weaponry, all this type of stuff, right? From that is made here in America. We send that to them. Then they go and use those weapons, use those dollars, right, to oppress the Palestinians. Let me show y'all a little visual of just a visual of the way that Palestine and Israel has changed over since 1947. So this was 1947. You can see in the white it says Jewish settlements, in the green Palestinian land, right? So that was Palestine 1947, and then the small Jewish settlements sprinkled here and there. Then with the UN plan, right after World War II, and which I don't think the Palestinian people were not asked whether they want what they wanted to do, whether they wanted to give up their land for a state of Israel, to a place for the Israelis, the Jewish people from Europe to resettle into their own state. So you can see Palestine right here going from 1947, then after, right, in 1947, 1948, the UN plan, already losing a massive plot of their land, which it doesn't seem to be right. I don't think that's right. If you were living in some of these areas and all of a sudden next year you just got kicked out, I'm sure you and your family would be pretty upset about that. And then you see from 1949 to 1967, that space continues to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And then you get to 2005, and this is 16 years ago, right? So not even where we are today. You see, it's just nothing compared to 1947, right? And that's all in, 58 years. All in 58 years that happened, and I'm sure it's even worse today, as Israel continues to encroach on the Palestinian land in the West Bank. So if you look at this picture, do you think that this is an equal side thing, right? Where a lot of people are trying to both sides this issue? No, of course, the Palestinian people are being ethnically cleansed out of this land that they have been in for generations, and it's getting to a point where they're almost completely gone from this picture. And so that's the issue. That's the issue that is faced right now, is there's an asymmetry of power. The Palestinians, they don't have the backing of the world empire like the United States. They don't have billions of dollars coming in to them to protect themselves. They don't have any of that, right? So there's an asymmetry of power here. So when, if you're going to ask me, do I condemn any type of civilian killings by anyone? Of course I do. Of course I do. But you can't sit here and tell me that someone who's been continuously against international law, encroaching upon someone else's land and forcefully pushing people out of their homes that they have lived in for generations against international law, right? You can't tell me that there's some parity, within this issue. There's no parity at all. There's no parity at all. The Palestinian people are being oppressed. The Palestinian people are being ethnically cleansed. The Israeli government, the right-wing Israeli government, and I think that's something important to mention. right? When we talk about the Israeli government itself, right? The Israeli people are not a monolith. There are a lot of Israeli people who do not agree with the actions of the Israeli right-wing government. It's funny. It's funny too, because Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump have had a very good relationship. Very good relationship. Interesting that when Putin and Trump have a good relationship, they're quick to, you know, criticize and, you know, call Putin a thug and et cetera, et cetera. But when Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump have a good relationship, Bibi Netanyahu is not ridiculed the same as Putin was, right? So you can always tell, right? You can always tell when there's something going on there, right? If they're not willing to criticize certain people the same way as others. They're not willing to do that. They're not willing to do that. And why is that? Why is that? Well, there's this thing called AIPAC. There's this group called AIPAC who essentially, you know, is a lobby for the Israeli government, and they come into our government and they give a bunch of money to both sides. So both sides, whether you're talking about the Democrats or Republicans, will do whatever it takes to protect Israel, whatever it takes. And let's actually look into a little bit what the Biden government, the Biden administration, has been saying about this very crisis, has been saying about the very crisis that's going on right now. Let's first start off with our favorite Nancy Pelosi. Here's what Nancy Pelosi said earlier today. Mind you, at this point when Pelosi said this was yesterday, I think there was about 30 Palestinian people that had been killed. 10 to 15 of them children, innocent children, had been killed. And this is what Pelosi had to say. Pelosi's statement on the Hamas rocket attacks. Israel has the right to defend herself against this assault, which is designed to sow terror and undermine prospects for peace. And so this is the full quote here, but that's pretty much all you need to know, right? So that's what Nancy Pelosi is saying. That's what Nancy Pelosi is saying. See, we all take in the same information, right? We see that there's an oppressed people. We see that there's a people that are under military occupation, getting ethnically cleansed against international law, rockets being fired into an extremely densely populated, essentially an open air prison in Gaza. And we see children dying. And we have a heavy heart about that. And we condemn that. And we want to make sure our government is not funding that. Here's the leader of the Democratic Party, right? The party that's supposed to be, the party of working class people, the party that, cares about humanitarian issues, like all these things that the Democrats claim to be. And the leader in the House is saying this after all of us taking the same information. This is what she has to come out and say. She has to come out and say, it's the Palestinian people, it's Hamas, whose rocket attacks are designed to sow terror and undermine prospects for peace. So that's what Nancy Pelosi is saying, right? We cannot expect the Democratic Party to do a damn thing about this. We cannot expect them to do a damn thing about this. In fact, let's see what Joe Biden also had to say about this. Let me pull that up real quick for you guys. I got a lot of tabs on this because there's a lot to say. There's a lot going on right now, and none of the response from the Biden administration has been one that's good. They have all been horrible, horrible responses, and this is another one of them. This is from Joe Biden.
My national security staff and defense staff has been in constant contact with their counterparts in the Middle East, not just with the Israelis, but also with everyone from the Egyptians to the Saudis to the Emiratis, et cetera. And I had a conversation with Bibi Netanyahu not too long ago. I'll be putting out a statement very shortly on that. My expectation and hope is that this will be closing down sooner than later. But Israel has a right to defend itself when you have thousands of rockets flying into your territory. But I had a conversation for a while with the Prime Minister of Israel, and I think that my hope is that we'll see this coming to conclusion sooner than later. Thank you.
Once again, I mean, this is what the administration is going with. Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel has a right to defend itself, even if that means there's this immensely disproportional response to Hamas, which is a group within Palestine that not all Palestinians subscribe to, that not all Palestinians agree with. That's not the Palestinian government. It's a group. So if this group is doing this thing, right? If this group is sending rockets over to Israel, now we have to bomb other civilian populations. And that's supposed to be some type of, that's supposed to be some type of response that people like me, people in America, people who see billions of dollars going to Israel to, commit these atrocities, that's supposed to have some type of click in our brain like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. No, because that sounds a lot like the reasoning that the United States gives for going around the world, right, and using the war on terror, these terrorist groups, as an excuse to bomb the shit out of places overseas. This is the same logic that's being applied to this very situation. So can we really be surprised? Can we really be surprised when we are perpetuating the same exact acts in places like Yemen? Can we really be surprised? No, we can't. And Biden's not the only one saying this stuff. Pelosi's not the only one saying this stuff. In fact, the spokesman for the State Department went out and said this when he was questioned by reporters. The leader of the State Department, who's supposed to be the diplomatic arm, right, of the United States. This is what he had to say.
We're speaking of the principle of self-defense.
I'm asking if you think that the principle of self-defense applies to the retaliatory, the airstrikes that they're conducting in response.
Matt, this is a very fluid situation. I would hesitate to comment on operations beyond, the rocket fire that is clearly targeting innocent civilians in Israel. So I would hesitate.
So he can't speak. He can't speak about the rockets, right, that are terrorizing innocent Palestinian civilians. He can't speak about that. He would hesitate to speak about any of that because he doesn't know all the information yet. But what he can speak about is the few rockets that have hit down in Israel. Not the barrage of rockets, the building that was the residential building that was destroyed, which is an international war crime targeting civilian infrastructure. Not that, not the kids that have been killed in the streets by these rocket attacks from Israel. None of that. He can't comment on that, but he can comment on, the few rockets which hit Israel, which I also condemn. I care about all people. I care about all civilians. I don't want to see any civilians dying. I don't want to see war, right? But I can see that one side has the power. I can see that one side is the oppressor. One side is the occupying force going to people's neighborhoods where they've been their whole life and forcefully, physically, violently removing them from their home and throwing their shit out in the streets and saying, you can kick rock, you can beat it, everything that you've owned, you got to go. I can see that. This person, this stooge for the American empire is going to come out and obfuscate about the obvious what's going on right now in Israel and in Palestine, the Gaza Strip and West Bank.
Hesitate to speak to specific operations that have just occurred, but the broader principle of self-defense is something we stand by on behalf of Israel and every other country.
Do you think that an Israeli military response to the rockets coming in, that a military response to the rockets coming in is covered by this broader rubric of self-defense, right?
Self-defense often does authorize the use of force.
You see how he can't square the circle that his lens and framework is coming from, right? Because if you say they have a right to self-defense, then the Palestinian people have a right to self-defense. If they're being ethnically cleansed from a neighbor, they're being forcefully removed against international law, and they're being hit with barrage of rockets. They're being their kids are being killed in the streets, right? So they have a right to self-defense, right? Well, then he can't find his words, right? All of a sudden he's mumbling, he's sweating. He doesn't know what to say because he knows he's caught, and he's not used to actually getting a solid question from a United States reporter. So actually, good on these reporters for actually holding their feet to the fire. here in the State Department.
I want to ask you about East Jerusalem, but let's talk about what you said about the principle of self-defense. Does that in any way apply to the Palestinians? Do they have a right to self-defense? Do Palestinians have a right to self-defense?
I'm in broadly speaking, Saeed, we believe in the concept of self-defense. We believe it applies to any state. I don't think that I certainly wouldn't want my words to be construed as.
I understand. I want to
Words to be construed as giving the Palestinians humanity and honoring their right to defend themselves as well. He doesn't want to be construed as doing that, as saying anything negative about Israel. Not a single thing negative about Israel.
I don't want to harp on this either, but the Israelis killed 13 people just now, including maybe 5 or 6 children. Do you condemn that? Do you condemn
that? Number's got up to about 40,
Saeed,
I believe, 40 or 50.
I'm asking, do you condemn the killing of Palestinian children?
Obviously, and these reports are just emerging, and I understand. I was just speaking to the team. I understand we don't have independent confirmation of facts on the ground yet, so I'm very hesitant to get into reports that are just emerging. Obviously, the deaths of civilians, be they Israeli or Palestinians, are something we would take very seriously.
We would take very seriously, but they're not taking it very seriously right now. He can't even speak and just bluntly say, yes, I condemn the killing of children. And that's what annoys me, frustrates me, infuriates me about U.S. politics and U.S. politicians and people like this. Because even a blanket question, do you condemn the killing of children? He can't say it. He can't say it. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable to watch this. I mean, there's more. He gets caught once again. Spewing BS, spewing U.S. propaganda. And it's just gross, it's gross. And the fact that we have to sit here and know that $38 billion a year goes to Israel, $38 billion, while there's people here that sleep under bridges every night. I live out here in Los Angeles. I mean, I think there's 70,000 homeless people here, but we're sending billions of dollars every single year to an occupational force with a crazy right-wing government. I mean, it's gross. It's gross. And I think people here in America, we're done with it. We're done. And the fact that the Democrats are coming out and full-throated supporting something like this. But can we really be surprised when Biden said he would stop the support for Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and he hasn't done a single damn thing about it? When he said he was going to do something about MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, who murdered a Washington Post reporter, who ordered the murder of a Washington Post reporter. He's not going to do anything about that. He's just going to keep it mum, not talk to the media, not answer any questions about it, and keep it pushing. So we can't expect, without a national outcry against this, and even still, we might not get what we want, and that's for us to stop funding an apartheid state. We still might not get that. Why? Because the Democrats are bought. They are bought and paid for, just like Republicans. There's no difference. So, I mean, there's some really stunning videos that have come out. And here's one that I saw. Just stunning videos that come out on this subject. And this is happening right now. And maybe make it bigger for you guys. Right now in Bat Yam, the town that this person lives in. This is the Victory ice cream shop owned by Arabs, being torn to pieces by Jews. I bring my daughters here for ice cream often. It's delicious, but taste doesn't matter to Jewish supremacists. And this is the video he shared. Sorry, there might not be audio on this, but the visual is all you really need to see. So you see, there's far right wingers everywhere, right? And that includes Israel, and that includes their far right wing government. And this is what's going on to people, to an Arabic store, just completely being vandalized and looted. Is Joe Biden going to come out and say he condemns this looting and violence? Is he gonna come out and say that like he did with the BLM protests and the few protests that got violent and turned into that had looting and had rioting? Is he going to come out and focus on that in this situation? No, he's not going to do that, because there's a double standard here. There's a double standard. When it's inconvenient to the Democrats and it's inconvenient to US politicians, they won't call out shit like this. They just won't do it if it's inconvenient. If it's convenient to their agenda, if it's convenient to what they want to convey, then they'll do it, they'll do it without a second thought. But he's not going to do it in this situation. And that's repugnant. And this is another video. I mean, this is happening. This is in Ramla. So I'm not sure exactly where that is. It might be the West Bank. That's what I would guess. But a mob of Jewish right-wingers in the city of Ramla is checking vehicles one by one. Jewish cars are allowed to pass. Arab cars are pelted with rocks. When one of the cars nearly crashes, the mob starts cheering. The police, nowhere in sight. Nowhere in sight. So, there's a lot of parity between U.S. police and Israeli police, it seems, which we'll talk a little bit more about later as well. You can see right here, all of a sudden, pelted with rocks. I mean, he crashes into that median just because he's scared. I mean, that's crazy. It's crazy that stuff's happening, and it's even crazier to me that we can stand for subsidizing that. We give money to that while people here go hungry. We give money to that while people here don't know how they're going to afford their next rent check. That's how an empire falls. That's how an empire falls right there. And, I see someone says LAPD has a relations station in Israel. Funny you bring that up, because this is something that I knew was going on before this happened, but I think a lot of people are starting to realize this as well and find this out. And it's that this says report criticizes NYPD collaboration with Israel. Report suggests that since 9/11, Israel has trained NYPD, FBI, and other local, state, and federal law enforcement officials. So we see what's going on there, right? We see what's going on in the West Bank. We see what's going on in Gaza, open air prison. We see the apartheid state in Israel, and then we say, wow, what those cops are doing, let's take our cops and let them train and get trained by the same people that are perpetuating this over in Israel. Do you really think the elite and the powers that be in this country are going to have anything to say against Israel when we send our police force over there to train with them against, to train against anti-terrorism tactics, which are going to get used against who? Right? Which are going to get used against who? Black and brown people. And we saw with BLM, it's not even just black and brown. Anyone who's at a protest, you're liable to get you're liable to get beaten. You're liable to get tear gassed. You're liable to get hit with non-lethal bullets that could take your eye out, give you concussion. So that's an insane thing that we do. I couldn't believe it when I first learned it. But we have to come to a reckoning here. We have to come to a reckoning here in this country, especially when it comes with our relationship with Israel, especially when it comes to policing overall. And the fact, can this be reformed? Do y'all think this can be reformed? Because I don't know if it can. I don't know if that can be reformed. If this has been beaten, since 9/11, Israel has trained NYPD. That's 20 years, right? That's what these tactics, these cops have learned. And it's translating to our streets. And then when we see it in other countries, we can't be surprised. When we see it happening in the West Bank, when we see it happening in the Gaza Strip, we cannot be surprised. We cannot be surprised. So that's pretty much the situation in Israel right now. It's scary. It's scary, and it looks like it's not going to end anytime soon. Like I said, the barrage of attacks are continuing. The barrage of rocket fire into the Gaza Strip is continuing. Right now, the death toll has got up to, I think it's about 55 or 60, with 20 kids being killed. I mean, it's just gross. If someone in America, right, if some of these people in America who support this, who support Israel, who will never criticize Israel, if there was another occupying force, and it's hard to kind of quantify, or it's hard to, have a really good comparison because we don't have any, adversaries that are neighbors to us. But if you had, say, our Canada was an adversary of ours, and you had forces from Canada just going into, I don't know, Iowa or Minnesota and forcefully removing people out of their homes that maybe their family has lived in for generations and telling them to kick rocks, get out of here, everything you've owned, now it's ours, right? If that was happening, if that very situation was happening, one, of course, people would be outraged. People would want to start, people in this country will want to start a war, right? But then if those very same people attacked, fired rockets, whatever, towards that adversary, we would feel like it was justified. People in this country would feel like it's justified. But when the same situation happens in Palestine, when the same situation happens in the West Bank and in Gaza, now it's, these terrorists are firing rockets against Israel, and Israel has the right to defend itself and destroy civilian buildings. So someone said, Justin, use Mexico in your scenario. Yeah, I mean, Mexico isn't really, I guess, seen as like an adversary. So like I said, I don't think it's a good, you don't have a perfect analogy here. But of course, people in America wouldn't stand for that. Of course, people in America would be like, people would pick up their guns as soon as they could. But when, another country, another civilization who's been, subject to an apartheid state for decades now, and then, one of the groups within their country starts firing rockets as retaliation, all of a sudden they're terrorists. All of a sudden, that needs to be condemned first and foremost. Israel needs to not be, the right-wing government of Israel needs to not be challenged. So someone said, if that happens, Canada is done. That's the level of our hypocrisy. Exactly. Someone said Justin is the only thing I like about football. I appreciate that. So that's the situation in Israel. It's horrifying. Like, just scrolling through Twitter, seeing like the death toll just increase, seeing people like Joe Biden, people like Nancy Pelosi not have a word to say about, the deaths of innocent children, even though they'll come out and say it's wrong for Hamas. It's wrong for Hamas to be firing rockets to Israel, but it's not wrong for Israel to be destroying civilian buildings, civilian infrastructure, and killing kids. It's the most hypocritical thing they could ever do. And they know it is. They know it's hypocritical. They understand it, but they will do it anyway. They will do it anyway because it's politically expedient to them. It's politically expedient to their pockets. It's politically expedient for them to support Israel, with full stop support for Israel, no matter what they do, no matter if, the UN and the international human rights groups and organizations are condemning this. They don't care. Because that does not apply to America in their mind. That does not apply to America, nor does it apply to American allies. And Israel is one of our American allies, so it does not apply to them either. They are an extension of America. And therefore, human rights must not be applied. Those laws must not be applied to us. Those laws must not be applied to people we support, particularly people we support with billions and billions of dollars. And there's the hypocrisy. So that's what's going on. And like I said, I didn't even know that much about Israel, the Israel-Palestine, the Palestinian struggle. I've learned a lot over the past few days, and I think we have to come out and just be full-throated support for a free Palestine, full-throated support. And the first thing we could do is make sure that our dollars here, our tax dollars are not going to subsidizing horrible atrocities, ethnic cleansing, and attempted genocides around the world. Even though our dollars are going to two right now, what's going on in Israel and what's going on in Yemen. So that's the sad reality. And I wish we didn't have to cover stuff like that. I wish we didn't have to constantly speak out about stuff like that. But when stuff like that is happening in our name, just like the people in Israel who don't agree with what the right-wing government of Israel is doing and is speaking out against that, it is also our duty, is also our job to make sure we are speaking out against America and the right-wing government of America. Even though the Democrats are in power, we're living under a right-wing government, and so it's how much has the squad been talking about this? I have seen some tweets. Going out, but I don't know how much they're really putting pressure on Joe Biden to end the funding to the Israeli military, end our dollars going there. So that's be something that we should be expecting from the progressives in Congress. If you claim to be for human rights, if you claim to be, for the oppressed and against oppressors, then you need to come out and speak out against that. Someone said AOC has. That's good. That's good. So that's that story. Let me read some super chats and then we'll get into Liz Cheney and what's going on with Liz Cheney and the GOP. Because they are lost. The GOP it's weird because they're lost, but they're also like not lost because they seem to have a lot of unity on certain issues, but then when it comes to someone like Liz Cheney and Trump, like there's still there's still a disconnect there. Displeased Jersey Mike, appreciate the super chat. You're a good man, Justin. Thanks for having the balls to speak out. I mean, we all need to. We're living in a society right now where, if you have a voice, if you have a platform, you have to be speaking out. You have to, because I think we're seeing our society devolve in real time. We're seeing it devolve in real time, and I don't think you can just stand by and watch something like that happen. And I personally don't. I will not be doing that. So, all right, let's move on. Let's move on to what's going on in the GOP. So this is what Pelosi had to say. Once again, Nancy Pelosi being on the wrong side of everything, literally everything. So Liz Cheney, essentially, if you don't know what happened, Liz Cheney by a leadership vote in the Republican Party was ousted. She was like the number 3 in the House Republican leadership. They voted to oust her from that leadership position. Liz Cheney, the daughter of war criminal Dick Cheney, who has, pretty much agrees with Trump on everything except the election integrity issue or whether the election was stolen or not. Pretty much agrees with her with him on everything, but on this one thing, did not agree with him. Did not agree with him on that, and it was not a principled stance. I promise you that. It was a political calculation because that's who Liz Cheney is. She learned from her father before her. So this is what Pelosi had to say about the ouster of Liz Cheney. She said, Congresswoman Liz Cheney is a leader of great courage, patriotism, and integrity. Today, House Republicans declared that those values are unwelcome in the Republican Party. Reasonable Republicans across the country must take their party back. What this obsession that the Democrats have, like Joe Biden has said it plenty of times, this reasonable Republicans need to take their party back. What is reasonable about the Republican Party? It doesn't matter if you're talking about the Liz Cheneys of the world, or the Kevin McCarthy's, anyone on either side of this whole Trump issue. What is reasonable about the GOP wanting tax cuts whenever they can get it, opposing any legislation, even these half-baked, these half measures that the Democrats are proposing, that don't even really fully address the full scope of the issues we have in this country. The GOP is even still against that. So constantly, we have people like Pelosi, people like Biden coming out and talking about this reasonable Republican Party, talking about people like Liz Cheney, who agrees with Donald Trump on pretty much all of his policies. So all the substantive things, right? The things that actually affect the American people. Liz Cheney 100% agrees with Donald Trump. But see, there's this thing that Trump did to break liberals' brains. Now anyone who comes out nominally against Donald Trump is welcome within the Democratic, establishment. Welcome. They'll even be praised as a leader of great courage, patriotism, and integrity. I mean, it's just gross. It's gross what's happening. Liz Cheney, I mean, I could care less if she's in the GOP leadership or not. The GOP right now doesn't matter. Right now, they have no power, no institutional power. All they can do is uphold bills, make sure bills don't pass because of the filibuster. So I'd much rather Nancy Pelosi focus her ire on doing something, pressuring Chuck Schumer, pressuring Joe Biden to actually push back against Joe Manchin, so we can get some type of legislation passed that's actually going to help people moving forward. That's what Nancy Pelosi should be talking about. Instead, she's praising the daughter of a war criminal who also agrees with all the war criminal things her father did and really wanted to get into Congress to continue those very things. So this is the correct response to something like this. This is how you should be responding to what happened with Liz Cheney. This is from the Politabunny, watching Democrats, progressives, and never Trumpers who hated Liz Cheney for years while she voted in step with Trump 93% of the time, suddenly praise her so they can call Republicans cowards. What a bunch of fake, unprincipled jackasses. And that's completely spot on. Fake, unprincipled jackasses who could care less about the plight of the American people, could care less about, how food prices are going up, energy prices are going up. People are being squeezed out of middle class. People are being squeezed out of the, promise of home ownership, anything like that. They could care less about all that shit. They don't care. All they care about is winning points, winning brownie points, winning elections, keeping, their donors happy. That's all they care about. They care about power. That's what it comes down to in American politics. They care about power. Someone like Nancy Pelosi, who's been in power for so long, can't let go of it. People like Dianne Feinstein can't let go of it. They'll stay attached to this power until they die. That's how much they care about it. Does Dianne Feinstein care about all the Californians who can't afford their health care right now? And something like CalCare, which can't even get passed because you have corrupt Democrats in a supermajority Democratic state? Does she care about that? No, she doesn't care about that. Does Nancy Pelosi, who also lives in California, care about that? Something like CalCare, single-payer universal health care, passing in this state, which could, it would change a bunch of people's lives, save them money, guarantee them health care? No, she doesn't care about that. All they care about constantly, all they give a shit about is winning elections, winning brownie points. And they don't even really care about that, because if they actually cared about it, imagine if you gave people health care. Imagine one issue, even if they pass like $20 minimum wage, they'll win the next election easy. But see, the Democrats have this thing where they have to balance. They have to balance their donors. They have to balance that money coming in from the corporations that they serve, while also trying to keep together this coalition that is constantly fading because people are waking up to their bullshit. So, I mean, it's ridiculous to watch shit like that. I mean, I don't know how you guys feel about that, but anytime I see, I almost hate going on Twitter nowadays, because every time I see Democrats talking about something, whether it's progressives or whether it's people like Nancy Pelosi, it's also it's so hollow. There's no actual meat behind what they're saying, because they're not going out there and actually doing the things and actually pushing, pressuring representatives, actually pressuring people like Joe Manchin to get these things done. They could care less about that shit. They want to make sure they're in power and they're making their money. They're getting their check. They're becoming multi-millionaires while they're in Congress. That's what they care about. That's what they care about. And so this next thing I want to show y'all is actually in close connection with what's going on in Israel and Palestine. Close connection. You know, I talked about how the NYPD and other, you know, the FBI, other local and state law enforcement agencies went over to Israel to train, right? Went over to Israel to train. And we know what Israel is doing right now within with the West Bank, within Gaza, the Gaza Strip, is, you know, akin to war crimes, is akin to ethnic cleansing. Well, this new study that came out from the ICC also showed a very, very, very similar thing going on right here in America. So this is from The Guardian, says police killings of Black Americans amount to crimes against humanity, international inquiry finds. So let's just go through this article a little bit, because I thought this was, you know, super telling. Obviously, we all know and live in this country, so we understand the dynamics. But seeing, you know, an international group of, an international council come together and actually say this, you know, through their studies, that this is akin to war crimes, crimes against humanity, is stunning. So in a devastating report, human rights experts call on International Criminal Court prosecutor to open an immediate investigation. The systematic killing and maiming of unarmed African Americans by police amount to crimes against humanity that should be investigated and prosecuted under international law. An inquiry into U.S. police brutality by leading human rights lawyers from around the globe has found. A week after the former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of murder in George Floyd's death, the unabated epidemic of police killings of Black men and women in the U.S. has now attracted scorching international attention. In a devastating report running to 188 pages, human rights experts from 11 countries hold the U.S. accountable for what they say is a long history of violations of international law that rise in some cases to the level of crimes against humanity. They point to what they call police murders, as well as severe deprivation of physical liberty, torture, persecution, other inhuman acts as systematic attacks on the Black community that meet the definition of such crimes. And this is why we cannot go around the world policing other people, telling other people, you know, whether they're, you know, acting, they're committing war crimes, whether they're acting brutally against their population, because the same shit is happening here and has been happening here for decades, for centuries. We have no leg to stand on. No leg, not at all. And so this is what this devastating report came out and said and proved, right? They also call on the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the ICC, in The Hague to open an immediate investigation with a view to prosecutions. The fighting of crimes against humanity was not given lightly. We included it with a very clear mind, one of the 12 commissioners who led the inquiry told The Guardian. We examined all the facts, included that there are situations in the U.S. that beg the urgent scrutiny of the ICC. So I guess this shows us that someone else has to come and invade us, right? Someone else has to come in and occupy us. Someone has to come in and bomb us because what we're doing to our citizens, because that's the same justification that is constantly used. So we can go overseas to places like the Middle East, to places like Iraq, Syria, Libya, not even to speak about Latin America and all the coups we've tried to institute there and have successfully instituted there, destabilizing the region. I guess that means someone has to come and invade us, right? Because of all the shit we're doing to unarmed Black and brown, unarmed Black men, unarmed Black women, and not just Black. I mean, we're talking about any minority community, any marginalized community, any poor community. So, I mean, this is among its other findings that the commission accuses the U.S. of violating. Let me make it big for you guys. Violating its international human rights obligations, both in terms of laws governing policing and in the practices of law enforcement officers, including traffic stops targeting Black people and race-based stop and frisk. Yo, thanks Mike Bloomberg, who the Democrats let, buy his way into the Democratic primary. Stop and frisk there in New York City. Tolerating an alarming national pattern of disproportionate use of deadly force, not only by firearms, but also by tasers against Black people. Operating a culture of impunity in which police officers are rarely held accountable, while their homicidal actions are dismissed as those of just a few bad apples. I mean, so the international community is coming together in a rebuke against the United States, in a rebuke against the United States' ability to put itself out there as the world police, to put itself out there as the moral arbiter of who's right and who's wrong in the world. The international community is coming out and saying, how are you going to speak on other countries when this is happening in your own country? This is happening under your rule, right? And what we're doing across the world by being the world police with our military is now being translated, and has been for a long time. We know that, we understand that, is now is translating back home here in America. So, I mean, this is a 118-page report. Matter of fact, let me just finish this because it's a really stunning and gripping article. The commissioners also charge that African Americans are frequently subjected to torture at the hands of police. They assert that the use of chokeholds and other violent restraints during arrests are tantamount to torture, also a crime against humanity under international law. And we understand that. We don't care about that. Nancy Pelosi knew about the torture that was happening in the early 2000s and didn't say anything about it. And she's still allowed to be in position of power, right? George Bush, who was the one who okayed that torture, is still allowed to go on Ellen, is still allowed to go on TNT, NBA Tonight, or whatever that's called. I should know what that's called because I used to watch a lot. But they're allowed in polite society, even though, it's been revealed that they, it's been revealed that they allowed torture, that they okayed torture, and that they were torturing people that were completely innocent with no trial, right? Which is against international law. So the same thing, like I said, that we were doing overseas, the same thing that we were doing in other countries is being done here, And it has to do with policing, the over-militarization of the police, the fact that the police learn these tactics from former military members who have done the same shit overseas. Then they come and teach the police how to do it, and places when they go to to Israel and learn from the Israeli police. Now it's being translated. I mean, full stop, right here in America. It says the report arose directly out of the foment that swept across the country in the wake of Floyd's murder last May. As protests erupted across the nation, around the world, the families of Floyd and other Black people killed by police in recent years petitioned the UN to set up an official inquiry into the shootings. So yeah, I mean, it just keeps going. Like, I definitely would recommend the rest of this article. It's not too much longer, and that ICC report which came out. Someone said Bush lied about Iraq to get the oil fields back into America hands. How does the passport found blocks away from the tower? I don't know what that means. But yeah, so that's what the international community is coming together and saying about us. So I think it's high time that we realize and we push out the message, right? That we need a complete revolution of consciousness in this country. And we need to, yes, definitely defund the police. We need to reform policing, right? Because this is born in an entrenched system, that was born out of slave catching, right? That's what the police was born out of. And then it became, there's a woman named Cerise Castle who found that there was literal gangs inside the LA Sheriff's Department, literal gangs, where you had to, kill someone before you can get, let into the gang. So, and let into the police department. So this is something that personally I don't think really can be reformed, because it's so poisoned at the roots, right? And if something's poisoned at the roots, then whatever grows out of it will also be poisoned. And so I personally don't think it can be reformed. And I think we need to move past just like, the small incremental reforms that, we've kind of talked about in the past, because we've seen that we're not going to get that, right? We're not going to get that from the Democratic Party. We're not going to get that from people like Joe Biden. We're definitely not going to get it from the Republican Party. So where are we going to get it from? It's going to have to come from the people. It's going to have to come from the ground up. It's going to have to. Let me make sure I didn't miss any Any super chats or anything? I know. Sorry, I haven't been interacting with the chat as much. Let me go through and see what you guys are saying. So status so close to 500 likes. Yeah, make sure y'all liking the liking the channel, liking the stream. People's Party. Yeah, I do support I support third parties. You know, I think we need to get away from the two-party duopoly. And I also think we need to think past one election cycle too, right? So if some people are like, oh, you know, I don't want to go out and vote for a third party because some type of spoiler candidate, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, so what are you just going to go out and vote for the Democrat without any concessions, without them actually giving you a minimum wage, without them actually giving you even a bare minimum public option, which for a lot of people, including myself, isn't the bare minimum because that's what Medicare for all is? Are we going to just keep going out and giving them our vote? No. Unless and until you start providing some things for my life, so you start providing some things for my community and the people that are struggling in this country, you don't have my vote. And that's what we need to move to. You don't have my vote unless and until you actually offer some shit up that's going to make me get off of work on a work day and actually stand in a line that's now going to be 5 to 10 hours long because y'all in power right now, Democrats, you're not going to do anything about the filibuster. You're not going to do anything about the Republicans in certain states making it much harder for communities, particularly communities of color, to vote. Right? You're not going to do anything for that for me. So unless you can show me you're actually going to do something to help me, you don't have my vote. Period. I'm gonna look elsewhere to try and get either the Green Party, the People's Party, someone up to a certain percentage, and then they're gonna have to start listening. And until then, I'm sorry, y'all are just gonna lose elections. Because right now, y'all have the power. It's really gross to have the power and not do anything with that power, to have full control of the government in this time of need, in this time of crisis in this country, and not do anything about it. And so, yeah, sure, you can scream for all these great things when you're not in power, but then when you're in power, you have to own people like Joe Manchin, people like Kirsten Sinema that are in your party and get the shit done. And if not, you're going to lose in the midterms. And once you lose in the midterms and 2 years go by without anything happening, you're going to have someone like Tom Cotton or Mike Pence or Ted Cruz become the president of this country. And then you think Donald Trump was bad? Wait till you get someone in the White House who believes all the same horrible shit, but is quiet just like Joe Biden and doesn't do press conferences and doesn't allow, for all this outrage to come up on the ground level from regular people. That allows people to stay sleeping while they go out and do horrible shit, while they go out and privatize things like Social Security, while they go out and increase military budgets, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the future that we're looking at. That's the future that we're looking to. And that's scary. And I don't want to see that shit. I don't want to see it personally. I know y'all don't want to see it, but the Democrats don't care. They don't care. And so if they don't care, then why should I care? If y'all don't care to actually provide anything to the working people that are struggling in this country just to get by, if y'all don't care to provide anything for them, then why should I care to come out and vote for you? Why? So we'll see. We'll see what happens. The infrastructure package that they have coming, is $15 minimum wage going to be in there? No. Is a public option, which Joe Biden ran on, going to be in there? No. In fact, he's going to give more and more money to these ACA subsidies, these COBRA subsidies that are just going to give more money to the health insurance industry. Couldn't even get you $2,000 check. So that's what I would advise. I would definitely advise being active locally and in state governments, things like Whole Washington, CalCare, New York Health Act. Obviously, it's not national, and I would love things like national healthcare to be passed and to be pushed for. But Joe Biden literally said he'd veto if it came across if it got to his desk and he could sign a paper that would give everyone in this country healthcare. Joe Biden said he would not do it. That should have been the last straw for us anyway. People shouldn't have voted for him after that anyway. But regardless, now I digress. Now I digress. Now I digress. So I have one last story for you guys. Like I said, I don't usually cover stuff like this, but I want to because I think it has, kind of an immediate impact on the working people of this country. Immediate impact. So a lot of times the in the deficit hawking and the inflation debate kind of goes on. The GOP right wingers, they're like, as soon as they're not in power, they're like, we care about the deficit. The deficit's so high, et cetera, et cetera. Things are out of control, blah, blah, blah. That's what, they obviously say. And then now that the Democrats are in power, they're saying there's nothing to worry about. Things are going fine. Things are going smooth. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle of that, right? There's somewhere in the middle of that. So let me share this with y'all because this is definitely an interesting article that I came across that I think is important to what people, the reality that working people are going to have to be dealing with in this country unless something is done to change it, right? So inflation in and of itself is not bad, right? You can't say, okay, in 1910 bread was like 20 cents or whatever, now it's $4 or $5. So if that's all the information you're given, then inflation is bad. No, inflation is only bad if prices rise to a level where people can't afford shit anymore. That's the only time that inflation really can hurt a society, like really bad, right? When the people that are, the workers, the people that are least amongst us in this society can't keep up with the rise in prices that we're seeing. So let's just go through this a little bit. This is from The Hill. Consumer prices, let me make it large for y'all. Consumer prices, consumer prices, right? Who are consumers? That's us. Those are working people that have to go out and buy shit every day. And, things, if you got $10 million sitting in your bank and prices rise a little bit, you don't really care, but it doesn't really affect you. But if you're working off a minimum wage, which half of all workers are working off of right now, and prices are rising at an insane rate and you can't keep up, you're already living on a budget, and now rates are much, prices for food, energy, everything is much higher. Now you can't afford to live anymore. So you can't sit here and tell me that this isn't a problem at that point, right? Then you can't tell me this isn't a problem. So let's keep reading. Consumer prices rose at the fastest rate in more than a decade as the recovering U.S. economy pushes inflation higher, according to data released Wednesday by the Labor Department. The Consumer Price Index, a closely watched gauge of inflation, rose 0.8% in April and 4.2% in the year leading into the last month, rising at the fastest annual rate since a 4.9% jump in September 2008. What else happened in September 2008? The CPI minus. So look, the CPI minus food and energy prices, which are more volatile, rose 0.9% in April for the largest monthly increase since 1982. So they're already not including food and energy prices in these indexes. Food and energy. So you tell me, can you afford as a working person to not pay attention to the change in food and energy prices? Can you afford for those prices to skyrocket 5, 10, 15%? Can you afford that in your budget when you're already living off of potentially minimum wage, 1 or 2 minimum wage jobs, or you're making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year? Can you ignore that? Can you ignore that? Because I don't see how you can just not include stuff like food and energy just because they're more volatile in these indexes. So they say most of April's price increases were driven by areas of the economy hit hard by the coronavirus recession adjusting to a surge of new demand. Prices for used cars soared, the largest 1 month increase since the Labor Department began tracking it in 1953, driving roughly a third of all April price increases. Used cars and trucks have been in high demand as rental car companies attempt to. That's the Labor Department said that increases in prices for shelter, airfares, recreation, motor vehicle insurance, and household goods and services, all of which had collapsed last year, were also major drivers of April's price increases. Now, all those things sound like prices for shelter, airfares, recreation, motor vehicle insurance, household goods and services. Those are all things that working class people have to understand and budget to afford those things. And Joe Biden and the Democrats, if y'all aren't willing and able, I mean, you are able, if you're not willing to actually give people and institute policies and legislation that ensure that people have enough money to pay for all these ridiculous price increases in food, energy, insurance, right? This is something that I've been thinking about all the time. Like, okay, so all these streaming services, those prices go up every single year. All these prices go up every single year. Food prices go up. These energy, gas prices are ridiculous now. All these things are going up, but people are still making $7.25. So something's got to give. Something's got to give. And then we sit here and wonder why we have such a large homeless population. Why we have so many people that after COVID are now going to be on the streets because they can't afford how much this shit is starting to cost with the starvation and poverty wages that they're being paid by these multi-billion dollar, sometimes trillion-dollar companies that are multinational that duck taxes left and right and then give their CEOs maximum bonuses while still paying their workers nothing, starvation wages. How are they supposed to deal with this stuff? So they can't keep coming out and saying that this stuff doesn't matter. That what, it's crazy. It's crazy because what the Biden administration, they'll actually acknowledge MMT. They'll actually acknowledge that as a framework they're working with, while at the same time, when it's convenient for them, they'll acknowledge it. When people are like, okay, so then give people healthcare, they're like, well, we can't afford it. We can't pay for it. But then when something like this comes out, they'll be like, oh, nothing to worry about. Everyone relax. And inflation it's under control. All these things are under control. All the while, they don't want to give people living wages that they can actually live on. They want to keep them. And even the $15 debate, $15 in 2026 with all this, with the rise in prices that we're seeing year over year, $15 in 2026 is still living in poverty. It's still living in poverty. We have to start expecting more. $20 minimum wage, $25 minimum wage. We need to start expecting more. So, I'm just tired. I feel like there's kind of a disconnect that we have, right? Yes, we can acknowledge that inflation in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. But if we see inflation with stagnant wages, which is what we've seen over the past 30, 40 years, then it becomes a problem. Yes, we can battle back against the deficit hawking of the right wing, right? But now we also have to battle back against people like Joe Biden, the Democrats in office, completely ignoring any type of changes in prices, right? Rising in consumer prices, without also being like, okay, because those things are rising, because we say inflation is under control. Now we're going to have to ensure that we're giving people a truly living wage. I'm talking $20, $25 an hour, so that they can afford housing. They can afford food, shelter, energy. They can afford all this shit, right? So, I feel like I wanted to speak on this because I feel like sometimes there's a disconnect and we get lost in like battling back against just the right-wing deficit hawkers, which we need to do, of course, because when they're in office, they understand that they can increase the deficit by $2 trillion with tax cuts and just keep it pushing and act like it never happened. So we do have to fight back against that, but we also need to fight back against people like Joe Biden who are going to allow this to continue to happen, right? Do nothing about it and at the same time not give people enough money through their wages to actually ensure that they continue to live. Let's see if there's anything else in this article worth reading. So inflation was widely expected to keep rising as prices recovered to and slightly exceed their pandemic lows, with the U.S. economy kicking back into gear. Measurements of inflation are not only influenced by the sharp jump from prices pushed lower by the pandemic, but supply shortages get driven by the slow thaw from the pandemic abroad. And people have been saying, some of these supply chains are not coming back. Some of these supply chains are not going to be, quite as efficient or even as present as they were before. So that means prices could continue to be pretty high, right? We don't make anything here. We've completely outsourced all of our manufacturing to places like China, to other places in Asia, because capitalists figured it'd be better for them in their bottom line to get rid of a bunch of good paying jobs, a lot of times union jobs, in order to make higher profits, higher quarterly profits, so that they can maximize their bonuses every quarter and maximize their time being CEO of that company and being executive of that company. Right. So that's why we don't manufacture anything here. That's why we don't make anything here. So now we rely on supply chains from across the world to buy the things that a lot of working class people need to survive, right? To buy cheap things in Walmart, to buy cheap things, across the world or across the country. So that's why, I've kind of been frustrated and upset with, I feel like, the lack of focus on this issue, right? Because if we're talking about working class people and working class issues, well, all these prices rising rapidly when wages are extremely stagnant, right? People are being thrust even further and further into poverty, thrust further and further into choosing between to pay for rent, to choosing between, are they going to be able to eat? Is a mother or a father going to be able to eat? Or are they just going to have to pay, for their kids to eat, and they're going to like skip a meal like that? This is all affecting that. So if you're going to have this, if you're going to print money, which, for things like infrastructure, which I completely agree with, which would, an actual infrastructure plan that wasn't, a half measure, would significantly improve U.S. economy. It would create a lot of jobs, right? But at the same time, you have to ensure that the people that aren't getting those jobs, the people that are still working other jobs, that they have enough money in their bank account to fucking survive. And I feel like no one's really talking about that. So that's why I wanted to cover that. In fact, let me pull up a video that I saw of Hillary Clinton, of our favorite Hillary Clinton, talking about sending jobs overseas. Did you guys see that when she was essentially saying, she was like saying we need to take back the means of production? Let me pull that up for you guys, because I want to cover that. I didn't plan on covering that, but it kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about right now. Here we go. All right, give me 1 sec to pull it up. Okay, here we go.
But also the economic issue. And,
remember, Hillary Clinton, wife of Bill Clinton, who signed NAFTA, who is the reason a lot of these jobs were shipped out of country to Asia, right? Places like Taiwan, Indonesia, China. The very reason. And this sometimes makes me feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone, because like up is down, left is right, in and out, black is white, because the very people that caused these issues are now coming out and speaking out against it. And I'm speaking out that something needs to be done to remedy these issues that they caused in the first place. So let's take a listen.
There is such a continuing anxiety about upsetting the Chinese. And there are two big reasons for that. One, Henry Kissinger mentioned,
yes, HRC also wanted TPP.
Consequence of war down the road somewhere, but also the economic issue. And here it's time we recognize that we need to rebuild our own supply chains, even if that requires a certain level of subsidized industrial productivity. We cannot be dependent on the Chinese market. It's not only bad for our economies, it is bad for our geopolitical strategic interests. Look at what happened with the
whenever she says that, she's talking about like war. She's talking about I hate when they use those mealy mouth words, geopolitical strategic interests. That means they want to ensure that the United States continues its place as the global empire, global dominating empire. And that's what they mean whenever they say words like geopolitical strategic interest. That's what the fuck they're talking about.
Of personal protective equipment or certain pharmaceutical ingredients when the pandemic hit. We were at the mercy of China. Well, we cannot let that continue, and we need to work together across the Atlantic to figure out how we're going to take back production. Now, will it be as low cost? Of course not. And how do we set our tax systems and other arrangements so that there are incentives for our businesses to return to Western democracies to produce things? And I would add that more and more businesses are seeing that unless they are low cost producers of retail clothing, which probably will never come back for all the obvious reasons, but if they are producing anything more sophisticated, increasingly the Chinese government, through coercion, through unfair regulation, through enforced partnerships or royalty agreements, is slowly stealing that intellectual property anyway. So I do think that we've got to get smarter about how we deal with the economic threat. And for people who say, "Oh, well, that disrupts the market," China has disrupted the market. China is not a free market economy. We tried. We let them into the World Trade
Bro, she's
Organization. We
senile,
sent
bro.
our businesses over there. We made trade deals.
You
They
did
are
that.
a controlled top-down economy. You will never compete and win against them unless you take back the means of production.
Yo, Comrade Hillary over here. Yo, Comrade Hillary, take back the means of production. It's so like imagine having her legislative record and going out into the public and on camera saying those words. That it's crazy. She's like, we sent our jobs over there. No, you sent our jobs over there. You and your husband, you did that. You did that. The reason retail and all these things aren't coming back is because of you, Hillary Clinton. People like you, people like Joe Biden, who's now in the White House, people in the Democratic establishment in the 90s. They're like, there's no way that she should be allowed anywhere near a camera anymore to speak about anything. And she's sitting there talking about China and everything. And I always say, if you guys watch the Takeover, you've probably heard me say this before, but it's always projection. It's always projection. She's like, oh, China's not a free market economy. We're a free market economy. Whenever we know what the free market would say to half these companies that are multi-trillion-dollar companies or multi-billion-dollar companies, all these multinational corporations, especially banks, the free market would say those motherfuckers wouldn't exist anymore because they crashed. They went bankrupt and had no money left. But guess who came out and bailed them out? Guess who did that? The United States government. So we do not have a free market economy. There's nothing free market about this economy at all. We also have essentially a controlled top-down economy. Essentially, we have the same thing. It's just controlled by corporate executives who pay off politicians to bail out those same corporate executives in those companies. It's all projection. Oh, it's because China wants to dominate all these markets and China wants to create this global whatever. You mean the same thing we have right now? The same thing we've been doing right now? And for decades? I mean, you have no leg to stand on when it talks about, markets and economies, Hillary Clinton, because you ruined a lot of the actual manufacturing economies of this country. Places like where my dad comes from in Detroit, where you used to be able to actually work a job at a plant and then retire, have a pension, and live a normal life. That was the way people like my grandpa was able to get out of extreme poverty and have some type of lower middle class living where he can provide for my father, who could then provide for me to be in a situation where I don't have to struggle knowing where food's going to come from every single day, or living in a dangerous, violent place. That was because of places like GM or Chrysler, where my grandfather worked. Guess what you did to those economies, those local economies? You completely destroyed them, desecrated them. You did that, not China. You were the one that sent, you helped send, all these tech companies that sent, make all their shit in China. And now that they learned how to make the shit, like they're making the stuff, like, of course they're going to learn something from that. And now they're completely surpassing us. And now you're angry about it. Now it's all China's fault. No, you have to own what you did. The Democrats have to own what they did in the 90s to facilitate what's going on right now, just short 25 years later. That's not really a long time for an empire to completely crumble, especially economically. So I don't want to. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear from Hillary Clinton. We have George Bush coming out on talk shows talking about misinformation. Matter of fact, I want to cover that too. Like, I'm kind of going off script, but I feel energized to talk about this stuff because I truly believe we're living in the twilight zone. Because literally up is down, in and out, left is right. Like, George Bush coming out and talking about misinformation. I hope I can find this. Let me pull this up because I need y'all to see this. I need y'all to see this. Give me one sec. Let's see. Kamala Harris coming out and telling Guatemala it's their corruption, it's issues with their government, the reason that they're having migrants come to our borders. Like, I genuinely believe we're living in the twilight zone. All right, let me pull this up. All right, here we go. I got you. Look at this. George Bush says he's troubled by the capacity of people to spread all kind of untruth. He's troubled. In his heart and mind, he's troubled. He's not troubled about the misinformation and untruth that him and his administration spread to ensure that we started an illegal and offensive war against Iraq, killing minimal 400,000 civilians. He's not troubled by that untruth, all kind of untruth. He's not troubled by that. We are living in the twilight zone. Up is down, left is right, and in is out. And then these people are being rehabilitated back into American polite society. That is not good. That is not good for American culture, for American society. For the canon of American thought. It's not good to have these people around. It's not good because these are the very people that led us into the issues that we have right now, into this collapsing empire that we're in right now. Thank you, George Bush. Thank you, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, the Democratic Leadership Council. Thank you for making the Democrats essentially Republicans, right? Thanks, Reagan, for starting that. Thank you, George Bush and Obama for continuing that very system, and Donald Trump for ripping the mask off of America, what America truly is, and now Joe Biden continuing the same things. So someone said China has quadrupled their citizens' real wage in the last 20 years. They're destroying everyone else, even in spite of their own authoritarian tendencies, which they definitely have. I mean, Google essentially built a search engine, I believe, for China that is like a censored search engine. But we have a similar thing to that. It's not quite as explicit, but if you're looking for information and you look on Google, if you look for information about any of these elites or any of stuff, you have to go to the 5th or 10th page just to see it. Now, it's not direct censorship, but it's kind of like this de facto censorship where they're hiding stuff, or they're creating these very complex algorithms on Twitter, so you only see like this echo chamber of people, of thought. And it's hard, like YouTube, it's hard to go viral. It's hard to, especially in news and politics, it's hard to grow your channel, get other people who haven't necessarily heard your thoughts and your side, your perspective before, lefty perspective. We're essentially doing the same things here. So yes, China has, authoritarian tendencies, just flat out authoritarian, I don't know if it's legislation or just authoritarianism, in certain senses. We have the same thing here. It might be dressed up and coded a little bit differently, but it's essentially very similar. It's essentially very, very similar. Someone said China is horrible with internet censorship. In the US, we just call it promoting authoritative sources at Facebook and Google. Right. Yeah, exactly. We promote the very people that lied us into things like this, like what George Bush is talking about with spreading all kinds of untruth. Who helped do that, George Bush? Oh yeah, that's right. The New York Times and Washington Post and all these people that thrust us and got the American people, manufacture consent for the American people to go into an illegal and offensive war that did the very thing that's happening in the Gaza Strip in the West Bank, where kids are dying from rockets from Israel. We constantly do the same thing. We're literally doing it in Yemen right now. So if you're not speaking out against American empire overall and thinking that those things aren't connected to things like support to us supporting Israel monetarily, and just overall supporting them in whatever they do, then you're missing the point, right? Your eye is not on the ball. You don't have focus on the real issues. And the real issue is that we have an empire that goes around the world telling everyone else they have to agree with American hegemony when it comes to American capitalism, when it comes to American geopolitical interests. And unless they do that, we're going to sanction them. We're going to ensure that they can't get medicine into their country. They can't get a lot of the basic everyday needs they can in their grocery stores and stuff like that. We sanction them so that they will agree with us. Unless and until they agree with us, we will sanction them or bomb them or do all these different things. Now, that's exactly the same thing that is happening in Israel right now, right? So these things, there's parity there is what I'm trying to say. There's parity there, and there's a real reason why people like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are not speaking out against this. They are part of an American elite and an American establishment, but they're also part of a global elite and a global establishment that want things a very particular way. And if you operate outside of that boundary that they've created, then America will hound your ass until you get in line. If that means sanctioning countries, bombing countries, killing innocent kids, women and children, civilians, that's what we're gonna do. That's what we're gonna do. So someone said the US cannot afford cheap wages and cheap cars. China can. Well, see, that's the whole thing if we're talking about inflation, right? Because they essentially don't have an inflated currency. So things can be cheap, and they can, even if they pay, I don't know how much they're paying their workers, but it's obviously dollar amount. It's a lot less than what we're getting paid here, but things cost less there, right? And things cost more here. Certain things, right? Certain things are cheap because we still get them from China and other places in the world. But we need to understand that might not always be the case. We might not always get the cheapest shit shipped into Walmart, right? And if people already can't afford hardly to live, right now, imagine what would happen if all those prices doubled, tripled, quadrupled, because we don't have the world reserve currency anymore. And I mean, I don't know what happened between now and then. Obviously, I don't think that the I don't think that the political establishment and the defense industry and the defense establishment will go down quietly. Unfortunately, that is a very scary reality that we might have to look at in the future. But it might not always be like this, It might not always be like this. So if they can't afford to buy U.S. products, then what? We don't have U.S. products. That's the problem. We don't have any manufacturing here. We have outsourced all of that stuff. All we have right here in our country, which is why our economy, was so down during COVID, is we have service and hospitality. Like that's where the majority of jobs are in this country. And then we have like the gig economy work. So we don't make anything here. That's the issue, And so we'd have to buy everything from overseas, but people wouldn't necessarily, the dollar wouldn't be in demand anymore. It wouldn't be the global reserve currency. So people wouldn't be as, willing to sell us things for super cheap. So let me let me get to some of these other super chats. I don't have any more stories for y'all. April Shadow says, good stuff, Justin. Hope your voice doesn't get censored by the FBI. I mean, it essentially already has been, right? Like everyone in the lefty media spaces has been completely censored. And something I've also noticed, and y'all let me know if y'all have noticed this too, but this is something I've noticed. It's that it's not really just news and politics that, you know, are struggling on the YouTube's new algorithm. Like there's some other channels that I've seen, like there's this yoga channel, like yoga, right? Like not news, nothing controversial, this yoga channel that 3-4 years ago was getting like over 1 million views on some of their videos, and now they're getting like 100,000 max, 150,000. So it's, I think their algorithm has kind of fucked up some other parts of YouTube as well, but definitely news and politics. I mean, the YouTube CEO came out and talked about it. The YouTube CEO came out and said that they're, you know, prioritizing places like MSNBC and CNN, and they're not putting lefty independent channels on the home pages, on the trending pages. They're not, you know, they're not recommending these videos to other people. So people like Kyle Kalinske, when they used to get 500, 600,000 views, sometimes 1 million views on their show, on their channel, now they'll get like 100,000, 80,000 views. So I mean, it's completely skewed. So I know I'm probably going to be creating a Rockfin pretty soon, and potentially a Patreon, because YouTube is completely unfair, and it's like almost impossible for a small channel like mine to grow. And even like a channel like Status Coup, which has like 180,000 subscribers, it's going to be hard to get to 200. It's going to be hard to get to 300. Like Kyle Kalinski's been stuck at like 950,000, 960,000 for like months. I mean, months. And then you look at someone like a place like The Hill, which I love, Crystal Ball, and I love Rising. They get 300,000 views, 400,000 views, sometimes 1 million views, like on the regular. And it's not like, you know, obviously they have a different type of setup, and it's a very news showy and all that type of stuff, but it's not like they're talking about anything super different than, or offering, you know, a take that's, you know, you can't tell me some of these other shows aren't a very entertaining take on news and politics. And the fact that Rising, because they're on the corporate algorithm, can get all these views, and then other, you know, other smaller shows or even big shows are kind of getting hosed and screwed. Like it's fucked up, you know? So I'm probably going to be moving over to Rockfin, at least doing both. Sagar makes me sick. I want to bring Sagar on and interview Sagar to ask him, like, he obviously has a lot of, I mean, he can identify a lot of issues, right? But I don't hear as much about his solution, like on the show. I don't hear him propose his solutions a lot of times to these same issues, right? Rising is like half Republican. It's the best you'll get in the mainstream media. Exactly. It's on the corporate algorithm. So that would be a good convo to probe him. Yeah, maybe I'll reach out to him. YouTube has lost their mission statement. They are corporate tube now. Yeah, exactly. He has a strange position on weed. What's his position? Sagar is secretly an imperialist. I have to look into that. I wish to acknowledge how you voice your beliefs and opinions without hate and judgment. Thank you. Yeah, that's something, you know, I just personally always feel like I don't have time and energy, or I don't even like know these people that much to like really go out and attack their character, because I don't even know them. We might disagree, and I even might think your disagreement on this issue is egregious, right? But I guess I kind of grew up, and especially like being in like football locker rooms, there's a lot of people that have a lot of different views, right? And I usually get to know them before I talk with them about politics or anything like that. So I understand that there's people that have like just bad view. And I think before Trump, like people could keep it on the low a lot more. Now people are kind of forced into kind of picking a side type thing. But I try and, like, I've talked to people that were Republicans, or talked to people that like my best story is probably like one of my friends. He, before like the primary, I started talking about Bernie and stuff. He's like, ooh, I don't know about Bernie. He seems like radical. Like I was talking about free college. He didn't agree with that, like all this shit. And then 5 or 6 months later, he came back because we had a conversation about it. And he was like, that talk really opened my eyes. Like I started doing more research and like, yeah, you're right. Like Bernie was right. Like I support Bernie. This was like back, I don't know, back in mid 2020, early 2020. He was like, I support Bernie, all this type of thing, just because of that conversation we had. So I don't want to put it past anyone to change, you know? I don't want to put it past anyone to change. And when you want to build a true coalition, like you have to bring in people that maybe even don't agree with you on everything, but if we can agree and push on certain issues, then I want to make sure I'm not ostracizing you or pushing you to the fringes or to the, you know, just say, okay, I don't like you, I don't like your opinion, so I'm just going to push you out and not talk to you, because you're just not going to get you're not going to get very far, especially in this country. You're not going to get very far with that thought process and that ideology. So I think it's good. I think it's good that, you know, Sagar and Crystal are together, and it's good that there's Republicans watching that program who could say, oh wow, maybe this Crystal Ball, I think I like, you know, the way she's thinking about these things. I like the way she's breaking these things down. I like the, you know, potentially the legislation she's proposing. And even if they don't get there right away, maybe eventually they get there, you know? And so that's why I appreciate that show. And I think it's good. I think it's good. Thanks. Yeah, Status Quo. Appreciate that. It's like I'm I'm broadcasting and streaming as Status Quo, but like Status Quo is also in the chat. So I think that might be Jen. If that's Jen, what's up, Jen? Appreciate that. Yeah, make sure you guys subscribe to the Takeover on YouTube. Tomorrow I'll be talking with Aaron Mate. We'll be talking about Israel-Palestine again, and also Human Rights Watcher from the Soapbox. We'll also be speaking with him as well. So it'll be a great show. It'll be a great show tomorrow. Make sure you guys tune in. I think let's see. Let me just go through the chat for a little bit longer. I'm going to be hopping off pretty soon here. It's been really fun doing this show with y'all. I appreciate everyone who's tuned in. Make sure I didn't miss any super chats. Yeah, but like I said, I really appreciate you guys staying in here and watching the show. I love Status Quo. I appreciate Status Quo for letting me be on. Yep, free Palestine. Hope you guys got a little bit more informed today, like I did. It was awesome speaking with you guys. Thanks so much for having me on. Hopefully I can do this again. I'll have to have Jen and Jordan on. I know they do great reporting, especially John, who does a lot of on the ground reporting as well. I know Jen and Jordan do that as well. So always welcome on my show. Appreciate y'all at Status Quo so much. Thank you. Check out my stream tomorrow. We'll be live at about 3:30 Pacific time. Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate you. If that's Jen, appreciate you, Jen. And everyone, make sure y'all have a great night. I know it's Wednesday and it's not quite at the weekend, but it's Wednesday and you got through hump day. That's a big part of it. So see you tomorrow, hopefully at the Takeover. 3:30 PST will be streaming. Thanks so much for having me on. Everybody stay safe.